Okay, welcome to part B of session 4. Okay, still on chapter 3. I want to explain a couple of terms that I think may not have been crystal clear from the book's examination, or just something I want to emphasize some things about these terms. And this is the notion of a normal good versus an inferior good. Okay, so here I've given the definition. A normal good is a good for which demand shifts outward when income increases. An inferior good is one for which demand shifts inward when income increases. Now, I want you to notice the key word people often forget when we're defining those words. They think it's, oh, yeah, I learned about them when we talked about demand curves. It must be a function of just price and quantity. No, we've added a third thing. We've put in income. Okay, so that's the key thing. Remember that whether something's a normal good or an inferior good, it has to do with what happens when people's incomes go up or down. Okay, and so usually we think that with any good, when our income goes up, we want to buy more of it. We're richer, therefore we can afford more of it. But actually, there's some goods for which that's not true, and I'm not sure if it is true, but the example a lot of economists often give is McDonald's. When we get richer, we often spend less money at McDonald's. But when we're poor, that's the only restaurant we can afford. We go to McDonald's more. Okay, whether that's true or not, let's suppose that it is true. Okay, so if that's true, it would mean that in recessions, McDonald's gets bigger revenue from people. People are going to McDonald's more than before. But when we're in a boom, economic boom, then McDonald's revenue goes down. Okay, if that is true, that would mean that McDonald's food is an inferior good. Okay, we consume less of it when our incomes go up. Um, Maybe the other example people give of that is used cars. So when our incomes go up, we buy more new cars rather than used cars. So if you're a used car dealership, you actually might prefer that we're in a recession. People might buy more used cars when their incomes are lower. Okay, if that's true, then we would say that used cars are an inferior good. But usually in economics, most goods are what we call normal goods. We buy more of them when our incomes go up. Okay, so that was the first point, just the notion of normal good, inferior good. Be sure to read the chapter, know what those terms mean. There's a good chance that could be a question on an exam. If quantity demanded for a good, or let's see, the demand for a good increases when income goes up, we call that a blank good. If demand for a good decreases when incomes go up, we call that a blank good, inferior good. Okay. Okay. Next, I want you to know this. A demand curve is usually less steep when there are good or lots of substitutes. Okay, I'm going to give an example of that. Try to explain this notion. Okay. Here's what I think is about true for me. In any given week, price of gasoline is currently about $3 a gallon. In any given week, I consume about 10 gallons. I'm not sure if that's true, but let's say it is. Okay. So, a point on my demand curve for gasoline. Tim's demand for gasoline. Okay, is this graph. When the price is $3, I'm going to demand 10 gallons. Okay. Now, what happens when the price is $6 a gallon? Okay. I think most people are like me. There's not much we can do. We're not going to change our behavior that much when gasoline prices change. I've got certain activities. A big thing is taking my kid to a sports practice that consumes what I probably spend most gasoline on. Even if the price of gas goes up to $6, I'm not going to spend that much less time. I'm not going to drive that much less. Maybe a little bit, but I think if that happened, I would still consume about $9 of gas, 9 gallons of gasoline per week. Okay, so my demand curve, at least in this part of in this area, during the $6 to $3 range, is going to be pretty steep. Okay, so that's my demand curve. Okay, now let's see. Do what I'll do this in red. Okay, okay. Let's consider a different quantity, a different good. Okay, and this is Tim's demand for a particular brand of gas in a particular gas station. So not just gasoline in general. Now we're going to talk about gasoline from the Sunoco station at the University Mall. Happens to be that's where I buy my gas usually. Okay. Let's suppose though that I only bought it at that gasoline station. So Tim's demand for Sunoco University Mall gasoline. Okay. Okay. Quantity, price, and I think it's true. So this is what happens. I usually buy my gas there, $3 a gallon. I only buy my gas there. I buy about 10 gallons per week. Okay. So if we have my demand curve for this particular, very particular good, not just gasoline, but a very particular kind of gasoline from this particular gas station, here's a point on my demand curve. Okay, 10 gallons if the price is $3. Now, let's ask, suppose that gasoline station raised its price to $6 a gallon, but everything else is the same. My income is the same, my tastes are the same, the weather is the same, and most important, the gasoline prices of substitutes. Now, in this case, the substitutes are gasoline at other stations. So let's assume that all the other stations are keeping their price at about $3. Maybe it's some are at $3.10, some are at $2.90, but whatever the price is, they stay the same. The only thing we're changing is the price of gasoline at the Sunoco University Mall gasoline station. Okay, if that price goes up to $6, what am I going to do? I'm not going to buy any gas at that gas station. And there's a few gas stations within a mile or two. It's an easy drive. I'm definitely going to save the $3 per gallon. And so what's going to happen is the quantity I'll consume is zero. In fact, it's probably, even if they raised it to $4 a gallon, I'm still going to consume zero. So my demand curve for that particular brand of gasoline is going to look like that. Okay? So note, in this case, we're talking about a very particular good that has lots of substitutes. The substitutes are gasoline at the other gas stations. My demand curve is not very steep at all. It's almost flat. Okay, so when we have, let's see, the demand curve is usually less steep when there's lots of substitutes. Meanwhile, in this case, where the good is just all gasoline in general, okay, there's not many good substitutes. What do I substitute for gasoline? I guess kerosene or something. I don't know what I would do. There's hardly any good substitutes for gasoline. In this case, my demand curve is going to be a lot more steep. Okay, so remember that demand curve is usually less steep when there are good substitutes. Um, okay, okay. For the same reason, okay, sometimes we'll talk about different topics: short-term demand curves versus long-term demand curves. Okay, and so the idea is the same thing. Suppose that, okay, I currently consume about 10 gallons of gas when the price is $3 a gallon, and he asks what happens when gas goes up to $6 a gallon. Um, how much gas am I going to consume next week? And the answer is probably about 9. Okay, I'm not going to change my behavior that much. So in the short term, that is from a week from now, the price goes up. My behavior is not going to change. My quantities are hardly going to change. My demand curve is usually going to be pretty steep. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if we ask, what's going to happen a year from now? Suppose there's this shock, and all of a sudden, all the gas goes up from $3 a gallon to $6 a gallon. Okay. Well, first, let's ask, what if it's $3 a gallon and it stays there? What's going to happen to me a year from now? Let's put that in red. I'm going to probably stay about $10 a gallon. Okay. But if the price goes to 6, okay, and you ask me how much gas will I consume a year from now, or even longer, say 5 years from now, the answer is I'm going to have uh, different alternatives, substitutes that I can change my behavior. In particular, one thing I can do, if it's 5 years from now, I'm probably going to buy a car that gets better gas mileage. I'm probably going to do things like pick an activity for my son's sports group. It's going to be closer to get the practices are closer to our home. We're going to say, look, if the price is this high, the current one he does, we drive to Maryland sometimes. Like, okay, we're not driving to Maryland anymore if the price of gas is $6 a gallon. So as a consequence, if I have a long time to respond, my quantity that I'm going to pick is probably going to be change a lot more. So if I had 5 years to respond, I might get, and it's gasoline goes up to $6 a gallon, I might start buying only 5 gallons at if the price is $6. So if my long-term demand curve, so this is like what happens 5 years from now when I have 5 years to respond, it's probably going to be less steep than my short-term demand curve. Okay, and the idea is partly it has to do with that notion I had on the board before I erased it. When the substitutes are better, the demand curve is going to be less steep. So that's what happens in the long term. We have more substitutes because we have more time to change our behavior. So it's basically the same principle, but often we economists will talk about that, the difference between a short-term and a long-term demand curve. Usually long-term demand curves are less steep than the short-term demand curves. Okay. So I'm going to end it here. So that's part B. Okay. So see you in part C.